My son didn't speak to me for 2 decades. No calls, no cards, not even a curt email. Then the headline about my windfall landed online, and suddenly he wanted me at his Christmas table, like nothing had happened. I said yes. I even told him I was bringing a surprise. He thought he knew what that meant. He didn't. The phone rang the night it all began, just as I was closing the blinds against a cold December evening in Spokane. It was the kind of sharp, insistent ring that slices through a house when the world outside has gone still. I almost let it go to voicemail. Telemarketers love dinner hour. But something in me reached for it. Dad. That single syllable buckled my knees more than I care to admit. 20 years, 20 Christmases, 20 seasons of Spokane snowfalls and springs and summers and falls without that voice. And there it was, tossed out like we'd spoken yesterday. Evan. My voice came out steady even as my hand tightened around the receiver. Well, this is unexpected. He gave me the laugh I remembered from when he was 10 and swore the broken garage window had just happened. Nervous, slippery. Yeah, I know. It's been a minute. Thing is, Christmas is coming up. Claudia and I were talking and we'd love to have you over. You know, family time, family time. I stared at the old photo on the sideboard. Evan at 8, gap-toothed, hugging a golden retriever we couldn't afford to keep after the divorce. The frame was nicked at the corner where it had fallen during a windstorm years back. I'd never fixed it. Maybe I liked the scar. A while, I repeated, because my tongue didn't trust itself with anything more tender. Evan, you haven't returned a call of mine in 20 years. I sent you birthday cards. A graduation present. They all came back unopened. Dad, come on. Life gets busy. College, startups, marriage, kids. You know how it goes. His tone brightened as he gathered steam. But that's why we want to reconnect now. It's Christmas. Clean slate. And yet, I said, turning to look at the open laptop on my kitchen table, where a news site still showed my name in bold. This invitation arrived right after a very specific piece of news hit the spokesman review. He paused a heartbeat too long. I don't know what you mean, don't you? I kept my tone polite, almost gentle. 15 million Powerball, front page last month. Funny timing, isn't it? Dad, I'm happy for you, he said quickly. But that's not why I'm calling. Look, we should have done this years ago. Can't we just try? Some part of me, the part that saves ticket stubs and grocery lists because paper remembers what people don't, wanted to believe him. But belief is a muscle you can hurt if you use it wrong. I looked through the window over the sink, where lights pricked the neighborhood like colorful pins. 20 years of those lights winking on and off, without a single visit from my son. 20 years of grocery store pies for one. 20 years of Merry Christmas texts to people I used to work with because the silence felt louder if I didn't tap something back. You're right, I said at last. We're family. That matters. I'll be there. On the other end of the line, a release of air a little too loud. That's great, Dad, really. Christmas Eve, 6 p.m. I'll text you the address. You do that. I let the quiet linger. And Evan. Yeah? I have a surprise for you. His voice perked up the way sparrows do when they hear a bag of seed. What kind of surprise? You'll see, I said, and hung up before the old instincts could say something soft and costly. The kitchen seemed brighter after that call, as if the single overhead bulb had warmed by a few degrees. I set the phone down carefully and stood still in a house I'd kept simple on purpose. White cabinets I'd painted myself, a table I'd planned and sanded over 3 long weekends, a mantle that held 3 things, an old watch of my father's that doesn't tick, a river stone with a hole worn through it, and an envelope I took out some nights just to make sure it still existed. The snow began to sift down again, that polite inland northwest kind of snow that doesn't howl, just accumulates. I watched it lay clean over sidewalks and roofs and parked cars and thought about the last time I'd seen Evan's face. He was 18 then, chin held high in a way that made me realize pride can look a lot like a wall. He stood beside his mother in a kitchen that wasn't mine, wearing a sweater I'd never seen before, and told me he was choosing stability, by which he meant money. By which he meant her new husband, a corporate ladder climber with a German sedan and a taste for showpiece appliances. Claudia, my ex-wife, had put her hand on Evan's shoulder like a seal of ownership. Martin, she'd said, that's me, Martin Hale. This doesn't have to be hard if you don't make it hard. It was hard anyway. The divorce itself had been week-old black coffee, bitter, lukewarm, gulped because there was no other option. Claudia's attorney smiled the tight smile of someone who doesn't lose, and mine did what he could with a file full of bank statements that said almost enough in 100 different ways. She left with the house on Queen Anne Street, the Subaru, most of the furniture we bought on layaway, and eventually the boy who used to fall asleep drooling on my chest after soccer practice. I moved into a rental on the north side with a heater that groaned and a view of a chain-link fence. 46 is an unromantic age to start over. If you make it a movie, you cast someone with salt and pepper hair and a gym membership. But in real life, it's cheaper shirts and reheated dinners, and wondering how long a car will run if you just keep changing the oil. I got up every morning, did the work I knew how to do, bookkeeping and small business accounting, and came home to an empty place that taught me, slowly, how to be alone without being lonely. Routine did what routine does. It healed, molecule by molecule. And numbers, oddly, saved me. Not just the tidy columns of expenses and revenue, but the kind that suggests shapes when you look long enough. The economy crumpled in 2008, and the headlines screamed what headlines always scream when the tide turns. Panic on page 1, analysis on page 2, op-eds scolding everyone on Sunday. I read them all, then circled a little notice about a bank-owned duplex near Gonzaga. The price looked almost like a typo. I drove past it on my lunch hour. Peeling paint, dented gutters, a yard that needed a mower and a prayer. But the bones were good. You can tell about bones if you've ever lived in a place that creaks when the wind thinks about doing something. The banker frowned over his glasses at my application. "Mr. Hale, I'll be honest. This market is not the time to be bold." "I'm not trying to be bold," I told him. "I'm trying to be patient." I signed, I sanded. I learned what a stud finder does and why a 5-gallon bucket of primer can feel like hope. I installed a deadbolt that actually lined up with a strike plate and experienced a joy I haven't felt since. 6 months later, I had tenants, a young couple with twins just learning to giggle, and their rent covered the payment with a sliver left over. I didn't buy a new TV. I didn't upgrade my car. I bought another address. 1 turned into 3. 3 became 5. Not fast, not flashy, just consistent. Spokane got used to seeing me at hardware stores with lists taped inside my palm. By 2016, I held keys to a dozen doors across the city. By 2021, I still lived simply because I liked the quiet better that way. And the absence of noise became a kind of wealth. Then, the lottery ticket, bought at a gas station, because the line for coffee at my usual place stretched. Out the door, and the clerk made a joke. About "you never know." I didn't know. Not until the numbers stacked up on the little screen, and the world tried to tilt under my shoes. 15 million. After taxes, after deductions, after the forms that try to make miracles behave. The story made the local news, then statewide. People I hadn't seen since high school messaged to say I'd always been lucky. I smiled at that and went back to my spreadsheets. Within a week, the calls started. Second cousins, former co-workers, even a teacher who once sent me to the hall for whispering. I recognized what they wanted, but I also recognized something else. I didn't have to pick up. And for the most part I didn't, until the one call I'd waited 20 years to hear and no longer needed. After I hung up on Evan that first night, I opened the drawer of my desk and took out a folder I'd been curating long before a lottery made any of this easier. Bank statements, property ledgers, receipts for every roof patch and water heater and coat of paint, a neat narrative of a life rebuilt by habit. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper and felt a calm I hadn't earned when I was younger, the calm of a plan. Outside, Spokane's snow softened the world to clean lines. Inside, I brewed tea and let it steep too long because I was thinking about the word surprise. Evan had heard it and pictured cash. Claudia, if she heard at all through the grapevine that never stops rustling, would picture the same thing, just in bigger stacks and with a bow. That's the thing about people who confuse love with leverage. They can't conceive of a gift that doesn't fold. But I had a different kind of surprise in mind. One built slowly, like those duplex repairs. One designed to show, not tell. One that would put the last 20 years into a frame even Evan couldn't ignore. I turned off the lamp and stood at the window, watching the streetlights halo the flakes. Somewhere across town, my son told his wife we were good for Christmas Eve, and she probably nodded while doing mental math. Somewhere else, a rumor started that I was generous, and by morning it would have tried on the word gullible for size. That was fine. Let them imagine me however they liked. They had asked for family time. They were going to get it. Morning slid in under the blinds with that blue-gray light Spokane does so well, soft, indecisive. I was rinsing my mug when the phone rang again. 2 calls in 2 days after 2 decades of silence. That alone should have told me how the wind was blowing. Martin. The voice reached across time and landed exactly where it used to land, behind my eyes. A pressure point, Claudia. Good morning, I said, steady as a level on fresh framing. I hope you don't mind me calling. Evan gave me your number. Paper rustled on her end. Claudia never called without notes. Look, things between us ended. Poorly. But we have a son together. That has to count for something. It does, I said, even when it's been ignored. She pushed past the barb. Evan is in trouble. Real trouble. He's built something important, but the timing, well, you know how markets are. Claudia's tone performed concern the way a stage actor projects to the balcony. If he doesn't cover a gap quickly, he could lose investors, the house, everything. Another rustle. I hate to ask, but with your recent good fortune. How much? I asked, not because I was considering it, but because a number clarifies character. 200 would steady the ship. Breath. If you could stretch to 3, we could breathe. 4 would be safe. You're quoting dollars like teaspoons of sugar, I said. Don't be cruel, Martin. This is for family, for your grandchildren's future. We don't always get to choose the truths that rise first in us, but we do choose whether to speak them. I won't give you a cent. Silence. Then the steal, I remembered. You'll regret this. He's your son. I already did the part where I regret. I set the call down with a click. That felt like closing a drawer on old receipts. I stood by the sink and let the quiet settle until I could hear the fridge compressor sigh on. Claudia's ask wasn't a surprise. The speed of it was. Greed doesn't bother with warm-up laps when it smells a finish line. I dried my hands, picked up the phone again, and dialed Evan. My thumb didn't shake. Dad? He sounded cautiously cheerful. The way you sound when the number you hope is the lottery office turns out to be a survey. Everything okay? I've been thinking about what your mother said. I let a beat pass. About money. About trouble. He shifted lanes mid-call. I could hear it. She worries. It's not as bad as she makes it sound. I wish I could help, I said, keeping my voice small, a deliberate wrong size. But I can't. I made bad moves with the winnings, I folded in a wince. Crypto, I know. People warned me. I thought I could ride the wave. It broke under me. Silence, then the tone change I expected. A thermostat clicking from warm to cool. That's rough, Dad. These markets, nobody can time them, he exhaled. Well, in that case, maybe we should push Christmas. You need space. We can regroup in the spring. So the invitation is off, I said, tasting the words to make sure I could swallow them. It's just practical, he said, quick now, eager to tidy the moment away. Less stress for everyone. We'll get together when you're back on your feet. When? I repeated, and pictured his hand making a dismissive little circle, the one he learned from men in conference rooms who never once had to repair a leaking trap under a bathroom sink. We ended politely. I set the phone down and leaned my palms against the counter until I could feel the laminate bite. 20 years of silence snapped back into place in one 5-minute call, like a rubber band reunited with your wrist. The experiment had given me exactly the result I needed. Data, not guesswork, not memory. Not the ghost of a boy with gap teeth. Data. You can love a person and still decide to stop letting them hold your dignity hostage. I made coffee and opened a legal pad. If they wanted to treat love like a transaction, I would show them what accountability looks like on paper. First, I went looking for the version of Evan the internet knew. His about blurbs were varnished to a high shine. Founder, visionary, builder in the AI space. Photos of launch parties. Panels with other founders who wear the word founder like a varsity letter. Then I pulled filings, state records, corporate registrations, lapsed business licenses. Names formed patterns the way stars do when you let your eyes adjust. North River Dynamics, Pivot North Labs, NRD AI. Each promised a future. Each quietly dissolved when the future arrived and wanted returns. The money trail, what I could see of it, showed classic symptoms. Seed checks in, upgrades in, lifestyle out. New lease, new watch, new vacations to places the algorithm says you go when you're winning. You can hide a lot online, but vanity outs you every time. It wants light. I called a man I trust, Steve Hargrove, who runs a fabrication shop near the rail yard and organizes the kind of chamber events where people still actually talk. "Martin," he said, and I heard chair legs scrape. "You calling about that kid? Tall, always pitching." "I am." He burned through 3 of my friends. Said he had an edge. The edge turned out to be lunch at places with linen napkins. Steve's laugh wasn't kind. "He owes big to a mid-sized venture outfit out of Seattle. Word is they're hunting." "Give me contact names," I said, and wrote them down as he recited. A receptionist put me through to a man named Dalton at Tahoma Ridge Capital. Dalton began the call sounding like a person whose coffee hadn't kicked in. By the time I finished my careful, objective recital, addresses, dates, screenshots, publicly available breadcrumbs, he sounded like a coach at halftime with a clear path to the end zone. "We've been trying to serve him for months," he said. "Every address goes cold." "How do you know all this?" "I keep track of the places I used to be ignored," I said. "And I read the public record. Can we reach you again?" "You can," I said, and gave him a number I reserve for people who will use it for reasons other than small talk. Next, I turned toward Claudia's world. If you'd asked me to bet $10 a year ago on whether she could stay out of spotlight scams, I would have held my wallet. Her social media painted a study in curated victimhood, soft-lit selfies in headscarves, hashtags that yoke faith to fundraising, day counts that climb like stairs, day 42 of chemo, day 63 fighting, day 81 grateful for your support. Links always to donation portals. Comments overflowing with prayer hands and "Stay strong, warrior." The ache those posts produce is real. I've felt it myself for genuinely sick friends. That's what makes the grift so foul. It parasitizes tenderness. I didn't have to break a law to test it. I had an old contact on the administration side at Providence Sacred Heart, Ruth Delgado, who once hired me to audit a dental practice after a partner died. I asked her for coffee, not documents. Over a table at a place that still serves cinnamon rolls the size of hubcaps, I described the pattern in general terms. No names. Ruth listened the way good administrators do, for process failure and harm. "If someone wanted to lie about receiving oncology treatments here," I said, "how hard would it be to claim the bills were off-system and not leave a trail?" She smiled without humor. "You can't get a Tylenol here without 5 systems knowing. Real oncology leaves a footprint." "That's what I thought," I said, and let the name land last. Claudia Hale. Ruth's face didn't move, but the air between us did. "I can't confirm or deny patient records," she said carefully, "which is the right answer. I'm not asking you to." I slid my phone across the table with a grid of Claudia's donation please up. "I'm asking whether the hospital cares if its reputation is used as a money pump." Ruth studied the screen a long time. "We care," she said. "We care a lot," I figured, I said. "If someone were to share a tip with the proper authorities, those authorities could do the confirming." Ruth nodded once. "Tips happen." She looked up. "And Martin, yes? Whatever she did to you back then, don't let this turn you into the same thing from a different angle." I heard the warning and took it in. Vengeance and justice wear similar colors in bad light. Back home, I assembled what I could prove without touching a single closed file. Screenshots, timelines. The way Claudia's biggest donation spikes aligned with the exact weeks Evan posted new watches and celebratory oysters. I drafted a simple, factual email to a reporter at the Spokesman Review who'd covered charity fraud before. Dates, claims, the publicly visible contradictions. No adjectives. Adjectives are the enemy of credibility. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with 3 replies. Dalton promising filings imminent. The reporter asking to confirm sources. A donor named Margot, whose address I found in the visible part of a GoFundMe comments thread, thanking me for saying what I didn't want to admit. Evening pooled in the corners of the house, and I let it. I made a simple dinner, washed the plate, set it to dry. The folder on my desk had gained weight without adding a single sheet. Consequence has mass even before it materializes. Sleep came in pieces. Around 2 a.m., I woke with the old ache, the one that asks whether there was a kinder version of the last 20 years available if I'd made different choices. The answer is always maybe. I made tea, sat at the table, and opened Evan's first Christmas drawing, crayon trees and a lopsided star. Because you can hold two truths at once. The past held wonder, and the present requires a spine. The next morning, a new text from Evan appeared with the address for Christmas Eve. I caught something in it I'd missed before and smiled. I'd misheard him on that first call. He hadn't said Claudia and I were talking. He'd said Clara, his wife Clara, not Claudia. The brain protects itself by hearing what it expects. Sometimes it also tells you where to aim. All set for 6, the text chirped. I snowflake emoji. A tree. See you then, I typed back. And because I keep my promises, I added, I'll bring your surprise. The next few days slipped past like scenes viewed through frosted glass. Quiet, deliberate, each one leading to something I could almost feel forming just beyond sight. By December 23rd, I had every piece of my plan laid out in clean lines across my desk. I didn't need to add anything more. I just needed to wait. That waiting was a different kind of cold. I spent the morning sorting receipts I no longer needed, shredding duplicates and labeling folders. Organization calms me. Always has. Numbers never lie, but people rewrite the truth in pencil. When the phone rang again that afternoon, I didn't even check the caller ID. Dad? Kevin's tone carried that blend of warmth and calculation I'd learned to hear through static. Good news! We got everything ready for Christmas dinner. Clara's been baking since sunrise. That's nice, I said. And hey, he continued, voice dipping into practiced sincerity, I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about those crypto losses. You didn't deserve that. You've always worked hard. And I know life hasn't been easy. That's kind of you, I said, sipping my coffee. But I'm doing fine. That's actually what I wanted to talk about, he said, tone brightening like a salesman spotting an open wallet. Remember that AI project I mentioned? It's moving fast. Investors are lining up, but I could still bring you in early. Family first, right? There it was, the pitch dressed in affection. Tell me more, I said. Because predators learn more when you let them speak. He launched into a monologue so slick it could have been lifted from a startup seminar. Exponential growth, machine learning breakthroughs, 500% projected returns, limited windows, opportunity to secure the family legacy. I waited until he ran out of buzzwords before answering. 300,000, right? I said. That's what it takes to secure the legacy. He hesitated for half a second, surprised I'd remembered the number. Yeah, roughly. But you know, it's not about the money, it's about trust. Of course, I said. And timing. Always about timing. Exactly. You get it, Dad. He didn't hear the irony. I almost smiled. I'll think about it, I said. We'll talk on Christmas Eve. That's perfect, he said, relief blooming in his voice. I knew you'd see the potential. After the call, I stared at the phone for a long while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft crackle of the heater. Felt it strange how silence after manipulation feels cleaner than noise. He thought he was clever, thought the old man who'd once been left behind had grown soft with age and fortune. But patience is a weapon, too. That evening I packed a simple suitcase, one change of clothes, the folder of evidence, and a wrapped box that didn't contain what he expected. Then I opened my laptop and sent one final message. To the spokesman review, investigative desk subject, follow-up documentation, Brooks Tech Solutions, cancer charity fraud attachments, 12 PDFs, 3 screenshots, 1 affidavit. It wasn't anonymous this time. Some truths deserve a name. I didn't sleep much that night, but not out of anxiety. It felt more like focus, the kind I used to have back when balancing books for 12 clients at tax season. Every number, every fact, every move in order. Christmas Eve came cold and sharp, the kind of air that bites your lungs before it settles. The morning sunlight glittered across the neighborhood like crushed glass. I made coffee, read the headlines, and watched the world pretend everything was cheerful. At 4, I shaved, dressed neatly, charcoal sweater, pressed trousers, winter coat that still fit well, and checked the box one last time before heading. Out Evan's house sat in one of those newer developments on the city's north side, rows of nearly identical homes pretending to be unique by painting. Their doors different colors. His was red. Bright, expensive red. The driveway glittered with frost. I parked at the curb and paused, hand resting on the steering wheel just long enough to let the moment sink in. 20 years of silence, and now this. He opened the door before I could knock. "Dad," he exclaimed, arms open, smile wide enough to show every perfect tooth money could buy. He hugged me like a man performing for an audience. I let him. "Clara," he called over his shoulder. "He's here!" She appeared from the kitchen, mid-30s, elegant in that curated way social media teaches people to be. I'd seen her face in their online post before, the wife, the mother, the prop for domestic bliss. "Mr. Hale," she said warmly, "it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Heaven's told me so much." "I doubt that," I said lightly, "but thank you for having me." The house smelled of candles and catered food, the kind of place built to be photographed, not lived in. Fake snow dusted the mantel, and expensive ornaments sparkled beneath perfect lighting. We made small talk over drinks, polite, hollow sentences that bounced off the walls. Evan led me to the table where an elaborate meal waited. Turkey, glazed ham, salmon, of course, potatoes shaped like flowers. Every plate gleamed. "You've outdone yourselves," I said. "Only the best for family," Clara said, eyes flicking toward the wrapped box I'd set near the tree. "Is that the surprise?" I smiled. "It is." Her expression tightened with anticipation she tried to hide. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Evan talked through bites, boasting about his company's growth, the angel investors who were this close to signing, the partnerships that would change the tech landscape. He spoke in headlines, not sentences. Every time he mentioned expansion, his wife smiled a little too hard. Every time I nodded, they both relaxed, thinking the fish was nibbling the bait. Halfway through dessert, a knock sounded at the door. Evan frowned. "That's odd. We're not expecting anyone." He opened the door and the world tilted. 2 men in coats stood outside. One held an envelope, the other a clipboard. "Mr. Evan Hale?" "Yes?" "You've been served." The envelope hit his palm like a weight. The men left without waiting for questions. Clara leaned forward. "What is it?" Evan tore it open. His face drained color so fast it looked staged. No, this has to be wrong." "What is it, honey?" she asked, voice trembling. "It's," he swallowed. "A lawsuit, multiple, from investors." His voice cracked. "They're freezing my accounts." "Freezing?" she repeated, standing now. How could they even find us?" "Someone must have tipped them off." He dropped the papers on the table. "They've got screenshots, bank records." I kept my expression calm, my fork resting neatly on my plate. "That's unfortunate," I said. Evan's eyes darted to me, suspicion flickering behind the panic. You don't know anything about this, do you?" "I read the news like everyone else," I said mildly. "It spreads fast when people lose money." He opened his mouth, closed it, then sat heavily. Clara was scrolling her phone, her manicured hand trembling. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Evan, they're tagging me." "Tagging you?" "Posts, news alerts. They're saying—" She stopped, staring at the screen. Her complexion went grey. "They're saying I lied. About the cancer. That it was a scam." Evan snatched the phone. The room filled with his muttering. "Anonymous source. Medical records. Fraud investigation." The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Clara spoke, voice small and cracking. "Who would do this to us?" "Maybe the same people who filed the lawsuits," Evan said, glaring at me now. "You look awfully calm, Dad." I folded my napkin and set it beside the plate. "Calm comes with age. You planned this," he hissed. "Fios, I told you," I interrupted, my tone even. "I had a surprise." They stared, both of them frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Clara stepped closer, voice trembling, but still edged with entitlement. "You can fix this. You have money. You could hire the best lawyers, make it all go away. For family." Evan nodded frantically. "Dad, please. Just until we sort this out. You know I'll pay you back." I stood, slow and steady, like the tide leaving the shore. "You already have everything I intended to give. What the hell does that mean?" Evan demanded. "It means," I said, picking up my coat, "I've returned the silence." And then I left. Outside, the snow fell heavier, but it felt warmer than the house I'd just walked out of. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of Clara crying, Evan cursing, the scraping of chairs. The kind of noise people make when the world finally tells them the truth they've been dodging. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet, the road slick and silver under my headlights. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. sitting there for a while with my hands resting loosely on the wheel. Justice doesn't come wrapped in ribbons. Sometimes it just arrives, quiet, precise, cold as snow. I'd spent 20 years waiting for that call. Now I understood it had never really been about forgiveness. It was about closure. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, so I hung up my coat, poured a drink and sat by the window. Across the street, a neighbor's Christmas lights blinked in uneven patterns. Red, blue, green, white. Red, blue, green, white. I watched them until they blurred. Tomorrow there would be headlines. Maybe questions. Maybe fallout. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight was mine, and it was peaceful. I thought of Evan's last words before I closed the door. "You planned this." He was right. I smiled faintly at my reflection in the window. "A Merry Christmas, son." The morning after Christmas broke grey and windless, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Snow lay heavy on the rooftops, and the neighborhood, still half asleep, looked like a photograph. Nothing moving except the thin line of smoke curling from my chimney. I sat by the window with my coffee. The world muffled in white, and watched the day begin without me. It was peaceful. It was real. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of being alone. When the phone rang just after 10, I already knew who it would be. Dad. Evan's voice came through thick with exhaustion and panic. I could hear it. The tremor of someone who hadn't slept, who'd been calling lawyers, reading headlines, realizing the walls were real this time. "Good morning, Evan," I said evenly. "How was dinner?" "You destroyed me," he shouted. "You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "You did that all on your own." "I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences." "You leaked it," he accused. "The investors, the medical records, that was you." "I didn't leak anything that wasn't true," I said. "People deserve the truth, don't you think?" "You've gone insane," he said, his voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Mom? She hasn't stopped crying all night." I almost pitied him, the way he said Mom, as if that word could still summon sympathy. "Tell Claudia," I said, "that tears are cheaper than chemotherapy." He fell silent. When he spoke again, the edge was gone, replaced by disbelief. "You were supposed to forgive me," he whispered. "That's what dads do." "I forgave you a long time ago," I said softly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean I'll save you from yourself." "Please," he said, voice small now, almost childlike. "If you have any humanity left, help me." "I have plenty of humanity," I said. "That's why I'm letting you face this. It's the only thing that might teach you who you really are." He tried one last time, voice breaking. "Dad, I can't do this alone." "You'll figure it out," I said. "You always said you didn't need me." Then I hung up. I sat there for a long time, holding the silent phone. My hand trembled slightly, not from anger, not from triumph, but from something older and deeper. Relief. There's a particular kind of peace that comes after you finally stop waiting for someone to change. By noon, the news had already broken wider. The Spokesman Review ran a full feature on the front page. Local startup founder faces multi-million-dollar fraud lawsuits. Ex-wife implicated in charity scam. It was meticulous, factual and devastating. Photos of Evan at conferences, screenshots of Claudia's fake fundraising posts. A quote from one of the investors: "We were fooled by confidence and charm. Turns out both were bankrupt." I folded the paper neatly, set it on the table and went to make lunch. Around 3, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Janet Morrison from the hospital standing on my porch, her coat dusted with snow. "Janet," I said, surprised. "What brings you here?" She looked uneasy. "Martin, I had to tell you. Someone from the DA's office came by this morning, asking about patient record leaks. I told them I didn't share anything directly. But they have a trail. It might circle back to you." I stepped aside to let her in, closed the door behind her. "Would that be a problem?" She hesitated. "Not for me. For you, maybe. You didn't do it the proper way, Martin." "I know," I said. "But I did it the right way." She looked at me, really looked him, and then sighed. "You know what? Maybe you did." She handed me a folded paper. "They're opening a formal investigation. You might get a call." I nodded. "Thank you." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "I read the article," she said softly. "You were right about them. But be careful not to lose yourself to the satisfaction." Her words hung in the cold air long after she drove away. That night, I didn't sleep well. Not from guilt, from restlessness. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past few weeks was wearing off, leaving behind something hollow. I kept thinking about Evan's voice, that mixture of fury and fear. He wasn't wrong. I had destroyed him in a way, but not out of malice, out of necessity. I needed him to understand what 2 decades of silence cost me. The next few weeks moved quickly. January came and went. The lawsuits gained traction. Investors froze his assets. The charity fraud investigation spread beyond Claudia. The IRS got involved, then the FBI. By February, both of them were facing formal charges. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't need applause. People in town started to recognize me from the article. At the grocery store, the barista, even the library volunteer desk. Small nods, cautious smiles. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough to whisper. One afternoon in March, while I was refilling birdseed on the porch, a small car pulled up. Evan stepped out. He looked different, thinner, his hair unkempt, his suit jacket wrinkled. "The shine was gone. Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded toward the porch chairs. "Go ahead." He sat, rubbing his hands together to keep warm. "They took everything," he said quietly. "The house, the car, the accounts. Mom's under house arrest pending trial. They're saying I could face prison time." I said nothing. He exhaled. "I need to understand why. Why you did it." "Because I wanted you to see what happens when the mask slips," I said. "Because you were becoming her." He flinched at that. "I'm not like Mom." "No?" I tilted my head. "You lied to investors. You used people's kindness as leverage. You measured love in dollars. Tell me, Evan, what part of that isn't her?" He stared at the snow-covered yard. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. That's what she said when she first started taking money for treatments," I said quietly. "Intent doesn't erase impact." He looked up, eyes glistening. "You could have just told me." "I did," I said. "For 20 years. That broke something in him." He dropped his head into his hands and sobbed, not the showy kind of crying that demands sympathy, but the raw, confused kind that comes when a person realizes the story they've been living isn't true. I sat there in silence, the wind moving through the pines behind us. When he finally spoke again, his voice was small. "I don't know what to do." "Start over," I said. "The same way I did." He lifted his head, eyes swollen, hope flickering through the wreckage. "You'd help me." "I'll tell you where to start," I said. "That's all." He nodded slowly, understanding the boundaries. "That's fair." We sat there for a while, father and son, surrounded by the quiet ache of winter, thawing into spring. When he left, he didn't look back. I didn't either. Weeks turned into months. The world moved on. The lawsuit settled. Claudia was sentenced to 3 years for wire fraud and false charity claims. Evan avoided prison through cooperation and restitution, but he lost everything else: career, credibility, comfort. He found work later that year, I heard. Something small, local, honest. Repairs, maybe construction. I didn't call to confirm. Some things are better left unspoken. I kept living. The money didn't change me. It only magnified the life I'd already built. Quiet mornings, good coffee, clean books, neighbors who waved. In early summer, I took a trip west to the coast. Watched the ocean crash against rocks the way time crashes against memory. Relentless, cleansing. For a long moment I stood there, listening to the wind and waves, feeling both ancient and brand new. Then I whispered, "That'll do," the gulls answered. The tide came in, and for the first time in 20 years I didn't feel the need to look back. Summer in Washington comes slow, like an apology. By July, the snowmelt had turned the rivers silver again, and I'd stopped checking the mail every day. There was nothing in it that needed answering anymore. No legal notices, no letters from Evan, no echoes from the life that used to hurt. I started volunteering at the community library downtown. It was a small place, tucked between a bakery and a thrift shop that smelled like lavender and old coats. My job wasn't glamorous: sorting donations, reshelving returns, fixing spines with glue that always stuck to my fingers. But the silence there felt different from the silence I used to live in. This one hummed with purpose. "Mr. Hale, could you help me find something about budgeting?" a woman asked one afternoon. She was maybe 30, nervous, clutching a notebook. "Of course," I said, and led her to the personal finance section. She looked over the shelves like someone scanning for answers to an equation they didn't know how to write. My husband and we're trying to get out of debt. I smiled softly. Start with something simple. Your money or your life. It saved me once, she nodded, writing it down like gospel. I could see the same uncertainty in her that I'd seen in my reflection 20 years ago. The mixture of fear and determination that comes when you're trying to rebuild from ruins. Later, while shelving returns, I thought about Evan. Whether he was learning that lesson now, about rebuilding, about patience. The last time we spoke, he'd said he was starting over. I hadn't asked how. I didn't need to. By September, I'd heard through the local paper that he'd taken a job at a small construction firm outside Coeur d'Alene. Manual work, steady hours. I imagined him there, hands raw, back sore, eating sandwiches from a cooler instead of ordering lunch on someone else's dime. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't bitterness. It was quiet pride. One evening, as I was closing the library, the phone rang. "Martin Hale?" the voice asked. "Female, calm, practiced." "Yes. This is Detective Riley, Spokane County Sheriff's Office. You were listed as a contact in a recent incident report involving your ex-wife, Claudia." The name hit me like a ghost brushing past. "What happened?" "She's in county hospital," the detective said gently. "Attempted overdose. She's stable now, but the doctors suggested notifying next of kin." I sat down slowly, the stool creaking under me. "Does Evan know?" "Yes, he's on his way there now." I thanked her and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the library's dusty front window, where the last light of day faded into amber streaks. I hadn't thought of Claudia in months, maybe longer. Not with anger, she'd just faded. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. But now she was back and the past came with her. That night I didn't eat dinner. I just sat in the dark and listened to the house breathe, the tick of the clock, the sigh of the vents, the distant hum of cars on the highway. Around 10, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "She wants to see you." No name, but I knew who sent it. I drove to the hospital the next morning. The same one where I'd had my heart surgery years ago. The one neither of them had visited me in. The hallways still smelled of antiseptic and rain on concrete. Nurses moved like ghosts, efficient, quiet, kind. Room 312. The door was half open. She was smaller than I remembered. Thinner, her hair grey at the roots. Her face, once sharp with judgment, had softened into something weary. Machines beeped softly beside her, tracing life in measured tones. She looked up as I entered. For a moment neither of us spoke. "Martin," she said finally, her voice brittle. "You came." "I did. I didn't think you would. Neither did I." Her lips twitched, the ghost of the smirk she used to wear when she thought she was winning. "You look good." "Rich suits you." "Richness didn't change much," I said. "Just made the world quieter." She laughed, then coughed. "You always did like quiet." I stepped closer, stopping by the foot of the bed. "Why did you ask me here?" She hesitated, glancing toward the window where morning light spilled across the curtain. "Because Evan still hates me. And I don't blame him. I didn't want to go without saying it." "Saying what?" "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air like dust motes. I didn't move. Didn't trust myself to. "For everything," she continued, her eyes wet. "For what I did to you, to him. For being so sure I was right when I was wrong about everything that mattered. People change," I said quietly. She gave a faint smile. "Do they?" I didn't have an answer. The monitor beeped in slow rhythm, a reminder that time doesn't pause for reconciliation. "I never hated you, Claudia," I said finally. "I just stopped letting you hurt me." She nodded weakly. "That's fair." We sat in silence, the years between us filling the room like invisible furniture, things we'd built and broken and buried. Evan appeared in the doorway then, his face drawn, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked surprised to see me, then almost relieved. "Dad," he said softly. "Son." He came in, standing on the opposite side of the bed. Claudia's hand trembled as she reached for his, and to my surprise he took it. None of us spoke. The three of us just stood there. Not a family, not really, but something adjacent to it. Something fragile, almost human. After a while I said, "I'll give you two some time," and turned toward the door. "Martin," Claudia called weakly. I looked back. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded once and left. Outside. The air felt clean again. Weeks later I received a letter. It was postmarked from the rehabilitation center she'd been moved to. Inside was a single page, Martin, you were right about everything. About love, about patience, about what really matters. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you find peace where I couldn't. Take care of him. Claudia. I folded the letter and placed it in the same desk drawer that held the old photo of Evan as a boy. Maybe people don't change completely, but sometimes they remember who they used to be, even if only for a moment. That night I dreamed of the past, of simpler years, of laughter that didn't echo. When I woke, the house felt lighter. Maybe forgiveness doesn't always have to be spoken aloud. Maybe it's just the act of not carrying the bitterness anymore. A month later, Evan stopped by unannounced. He looked healthier, sunburnt from work, hands rough. I brought something, he said, holding up a small box. Inside was a photo of a young boy and an older man fishing by a lake. Where'd you find this? I asked. In Mom's things. She kept it all these years, he paused. I thought you should have it. I studied the photo. I remembered that day. The water cold, the wind strong, Evan shouting with joy when he caught his first fish. She remembered the good parts too, I said. So do I, he murmured. He sat down across from me. I'm not asking for anything, he said quietly. Not money, not help. I just want to visit sometimes, then visit, I said simply. He smiled. A real one this time. And in that moment, the 20 years between us didn't vanish. They just mattered less. When winter came again, the snow fell softer, the nights quieter. I still lived in the same small house, still drove the same reliable car, still read by the same window. But now sometimes there were footprints in the snow outside, smaller ones that stopped at my porch before heading back down the path. Evan never knocked. He just left something on the steps each time, a loaf of bread, a thermos of soup, a note that said thanks, and that was enough. Maybe life doesn't give you happy endings. Maybe it just gives you a second chance to choose peace instead of pain. I'll take that. Every time. Winter always comes back softer the second time, familiar, almost forgiving. By December, the city was dusted in snow again, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean, like the world had exhaled. It had been nearly a year since that Christmas. A year since the lawsuits, the headlines, the shouting, and the silence that followed. A year since Evan had started showing up quietly, without excuses. I saw him most Sundays now. He'd knock once, step inside with a thermos of coffee and a box of pastries, and sit across the table as if he'd been doing it all his life. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. Both felt right. He told me about his job and repairing old houses, refinishing floors, learning how to work with his hands instead of PowerPoints. There was pride in his voice when he said it. A kind of humility, too. It's strange, he said one morning, his hands wrapped around his mug for warmth. I make 1/10 of what I used to, but I sleep better. Then you're richer than you were before, I said. He smiled. Guess that's true. We didn't talk about Claudia much. She'd passed away quietly in late spring. Complications from medication. Evan handled the funeral. I didn't attend. Not because I couldn't, but because it felt like the final act of a story that didn't need witnesses anymore. When he told me, he said, "She wasn't a monster, Dad. Just lost." I know, I said. We all are sometimes, he nodded. And that was all we needed to say. In January, he brought someone new to dinner, a woman named Hannah. Early 30s, kind eyes, the sort of quiet steadiness that doesn't need to announce itself. She worked as a nurse, the kind who still took her time to hold patients' hands instead of watching the clock. Dad, this is Hannah, Evan said, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. We've been seeing each other for a few months. She extended her hand. It's really nice to meet you, Mr. Hale. Please, I said, shaking it. Martin's fine. We ate stew and bread and talked about ordinary things. Books, travel, her patients, the best coffee in town. When they left that night, the house felt a little less empty. Later, as I washed the dishes, I caught myself smiling at the thought of Evan laughing again. Really laughing. Not performing it. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive as a grand gesture. Sometimes it just knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I brought someone for you to meet." By spring, the library had started a financial literacy program, and they asked if I'd teach a class. I almost said no. The idea of standing in front of people again felt strange. But something in me stirred. A sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. So I said yes. The first session was small. 5 people sitting in mismatched chairs, notebooks ready. I talked about budgeting, debt, saving, but mostly about patience. About how money isn't just math. It's emotion, it's fear, it's control. After class, one woman lingered. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you talk like you've lost a lot." "I have," I admitted. "But losing taught me what to keep." She smiled at that. "Maybe that's worth more than money." "Maybe it is." By summer, the classes were full. I started bringing Evan to help. He'd handled the practical side, fixing things, explaining contracts. People liked him. He was good with them in a way I never was, direct, patient, humble. One evening, as we were locking up, he said, "You know, I think Mum would have liked this." "Teaching?" "No," he said. "You being happy." It caught me off guard. Happiness wasn't a word I'd used for myself in a long time. But maybe he was right. The air was warm that night, the kind of soft summer air that smells faintly of grass and rain. We stood under the streetlight, neither of us needing to fill the silence. "Thanks for not giving up on me," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "I did give up," I said, "but only on the version of you that didn't want to change." He nodded, understanding. We parted ways, and as I drove home, I realized something. Forgiveness had never been about them saying sorry. It had always been about me stopping the replay, that endless loop of betrayal and anger that had trapped me for years. When you stop waiting for an apology, you start healing. Fall came again. The leaves along the river blazed gold and red, and Evan called one Sunday morning to say he and Hannah were expecting a baby. He sounded terrified and thrilled all at once. "That's good news," I said, smiling into the phone. "You'll be a good father." "Think so?" "You're already better than you were," I said. That's how it starts. When he told me they wanted to name the baby Claire if it was a girl, after Claudia's middle name, I didn't object. That was his way of forgiving her, and maybe a little of himself. Life doesn't erase the past, it just grows around it. When winter returned again, I found myself holding a newborn, my granddaughter, wrapped in a blanket the color of dawn. "She's perfect," I whispered, "because that's what you say." "But I meant it," Evan smiled. "She's loud." "Good," I said. "Means she knows how to be heard." He laughed softly. "Guess she gets that from you." Maybe she did. I looked down at that small, a wrinkled face, the next branch on a tree that had nearly stopped growing, and felt something I hadn't in years. Continuity. The mistakes, the lessons, the losses, all of it led here. I thought about how once, long ago, I'd stood in a cold house waiting for a phone that never rang. And now here I was, surrounded by warmth, holding the future in my hands. I didn't deserve it, maybe. But life isn't about deserving. It's about showing up when the call finally comes. Evan placed a hand on my shoulder. "Dad," he said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For not walking away forever." I met his gaze. "It crossed my mind," I said honestly. "But you're my son." "That's a hard thing to unlearn." He nodded, eyes wet. The baby stirred in my arms, made a small sound like a sigh, and for the first time in a long time, I understood what peace really meant. Not revenge, not victory, not justice served cold, just the quiet knowledge that the worst had passed, and what remained was still worth living for. That night, after they left, I sat by the window again, the same one I'd stared out of 100 lonely nights before. The snow was falling softly outside, blanketing everything in white, but this time, it didn't look like isolation. It looked like grace. And as the house settled into its quiet rhythm, I whispered into the stillness, not as a prayer, not as a wish, just as a truth that had finally learned how to stand. I forgive you. I forgive me too. The next year unfolded in slow, generous layers, like pages of a book I'd finally stopped skimming. Claire grew fast. Babies have a way of doing that. You blink and suddenly they're forming sentences out of air. Evan and Hannah brought her every Sunday now. Sometimes I'd see them walking up the path from the kitchen window. Hannah with the diaper bag, Evan juggling a blanket and a bag of groceries, the baby bundled like a little pink star. "Grandpa," Evan would call jokingly as he nudged the door open. "You ready for your weekly chaos delivery?" "Always," I'd reply. And I meant it. There was laughter in the house again, the kind that doesn't need to explain itself. Claire had her mother's eyes, clear and curious, but her smile was pure Evan, the kind that used to make strangers smile back when he was small. I used to think those smiles had died in him, but holding her, I realized they'd only been waiting to be passed down. By spring, I'd started something new, a foundation, small and local. The Hale Grant for Honest Beginnings. It wasn't grand, but it felt right. We offered small interest-free loans to people rebuilding after loss. Widows, single parents, veterans, folks coming out of debt or addiction. Evan helped with the logistics. Hannah volunteered as our health counselor. The community center gave us a small room to operate out of, with mismatched chairs and a second-hand printer that jammed twice a day. But every week, someone walked out of that room holding a little bit of hope they didn't have before. That was enough. One afternoon, after finishing some paperwork, Evan leaned against the desk. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't bought that first duplex?" "Every day," I said. "And I think about how I almost didn't." He smiled. "I guess we're all one decision away from a different life." "Exactly," I said. "And one apology away from a better one." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "I wish Mom could see this." "She does," I said softly. "Just not the way we do," he didn't reply. He didn't need to. As months passed, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's maintenance. It's like tending a garden. You don't do it once and walk away. You keep pulling the weeds that grow back when you're not looking. Some mornings I still woke with the echo of old anger, the ghost of Claudia's words, the ache of 20 silent years. But I'd get up, make coffee, and remind myself, that was then. This is now. It worked most days. That summer, Evan invited me to speak at a small workshop he and Hannah organized for young parents trying to rebuild their finances. "Dad," he said, "you've got stories people need to hear." I chuckled. "You mean cautionary tales?" "Exactly." The event was modest. Maybe 30 people sitting in folding chairs under string lights in a church basement. Evan introduced me as a man who taught me that wealth doesn't mean winning. It means waking up proud of who you are. That line nearly undid me. When it was my turn, I walked up to the front, looked at all those tired but hopeful faces and said, "The only thing money ever truly buys you is time. Time to choose who you want to be. Don't waste it trying to prove something to people who don't matter." When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a long beat, that kind of silence that feels like understanding. Afterward, a young couple came up to me. The man shook my hand, eyes wet. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that tonight." "I think I do," I said. "I used to be you." That night, I drove home along the river. The moonlight rippled across the water, and I realized how much calmer it all looked now. Not because the river had changed, but because I had stopped fighting its current. I slept deeply for the first time in years. When autumn arrived, Claire turned 2. We had a small celebration in my backyard, just us, a few neighbors, and too much cake. She toddled through the grass, giggling at the sound of her own footsteps. At one point, she stumbled and fell near my chair. Evan started forward, but I waved him off gently. "Let her try," I said. Claire looked up at me, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Then she pushed herself back to her feet, wobbled a little, and kept walking, determined and proud. Evan smiled, shaking his head. "Stubborn like her grandpa." "Resilient," I corrected. "There's a difference." That night, after everyone left and the backyard was quiet again, I sat with a piece of leftover cake and thought about how strange it all was. How the same house that had once been filled with nothing but silence was now full of laughter and crumbs, and little footprints. I thought about the younger version of me, the one who used to wait by the phone for a call that never came. If I could tell him anything now, it would be this. You don't get back the years you lost, but you get to decide what you do with the ones that follow. Maybe that's what redemption really is. Not erasing the past, but outgrowing it. In early winter, I received a letter from one of the investors who'd sued Evan years before, Helen Martinez, the woman who lost $50,000 to his failed company. Her note was simple. "Mr. Hale, I wanted you to know that your son reached out last month. He repaid every cent when with interest. I almost didn't believe the check was real until it cleared. He didn't have to. But he said he wanted to make things right. You raised a good man after all." Helen, I read it 3 times before folding it carefully and setting it next to Claudia's last letter in the drawer. I didn't cry, but something in my chest loosened, the final knot of a story that had been tied too tight for too long. Christmas came again, and this time I was the one hosting. Hannah cooked, Evan decorated, and Claire insisted on hanging every ornament in the same small corner of the tree. At dinner, we raised our glasses, not to wealth or luck or second chances, but to something simpler. To the long way around, I said. Evan laughed. The long way? The only way that ever really teaches you anything, I replied. He nodded. Then to the long way around, we drank, and the clinking of glasses sounded like forgiveness finally finding its echo. Later that night, when the house was quiet again and they'd gone home, I stood by the window, my window, and watched the snow fall in slow, steady sheets. This time I didn't see isolation. I saw continuity. The phone that had once haunted me sat silent on the counter, not because no one called, but because I no longer needed it to. I turned off the lights and whispered into the soft dark, the words feeling both like a benediction and a release. Some stories end in silence. The lucky ones end in peace, and mine finally had found both. The following spring unfolded gently, like an old song replaying in a softer key. The air carried that damp, hopeful scent of thawing earth, and the first tulips had started pushing through the soil along my front walk, tiny splashes of color defying the gray. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee when Evan's truck pulled up. He stepped out, dust on his jeans, hands rough but sure. Claire was in the passenger seat, clutching a crayon drawing that fluttered like a flag in the breeze. "Grandpa," she yelled, hopping down before he could even open her door. "I drew you." She handed me a sheet of paper, filled with bright, uneven lines, a stick figure with wild grey hair standing next to a big yellow sun. "It's perfect," I said, smiling as I crouched to her level. "You even got my hair right." She grinned proudly, then ran off toward the garden where the tulips were blooming. Evan followed with a small grin. "She drew everyone," he said. "We've got a whole gallery at home. One of me, one of Hannah, and apparently a horse that's also our neighbor. Every artist needs creative freedom," I said. He chuckled, then leaned on the porch rail. "You doing okay, Dad?" "I'm more than okay," I said. "You?" "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I finally finished paying off the last bit of restitution. Feels like I can breathe again." I studied his face, older now, steadier. The arrogance that once clung to him had been replaced with something humbler, quieter, more human. "You earned that air," I said. He looked at me, a little surprised. "You really mean that?" "I do." For a long moment we just watched Claire picking tulips, one for me, one for the ground, one for herself. "She's got your stubborn streak," he said finally. I smiled faintly. "Let's call it determination." He laughed. "Yeah, let's." That summer we started a tradition. Every Friday evening Evan and I would sit outside after dinner while Hannah put Claire to bed. We'd share a beer, talk about work, sometimes talk about Mom, sometimes not. The conversations came easier now, less like repairing a bridge and more like walking across one that had already been rebuilt. One night, as the sun melted behind the pines, Evan said quietly, "You know, for years I blamed you for everything." "I know," I said. "I thought you gave up on us, on me. I used to tell myself that you just didn't care." "And now?" I asked. He took a sip, watching the sky shift from orange to violet. "Now I think maybe I didn't care enough to understand you." "That's how most sons feel," I said gently, "until they become fathers." He nodded, the words landing somewhere deep. After a while he looked over and smiled. "I hope I can be half the dad you are." That made me laugh, a soft, surprised sound that felt good in my chest. "You already are." "Maybe better." Later that summer, the foundation expanded. Donations had started trickling in from people who'd heard our story. Not the sensational version, but the quieter truth, a father, a son, and the long, slow work of rebuilding what greed and pride had broken. We opened a second small office on the west side, closer to the neighborhoods that needed us most. Evan handled the renovations himself, sanding floors, painting walls, making something functional out of what used to be forgotten. At the grand reopening, he stood in front of a small crowd of volunteers, donors and neighbors, and said, "This place isn't about charity. It's about second chances. My father gave me one, and I intend to spend the rest of my life passing that forward." People applauded. I didn't. I just sat there quietly, watching him own his story. That was applause enough. When autumn came, I found myself reflecting more, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. I'd been given the rarest of gifts, closure that didn't come from revenge, but from growth. The past no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a scar, something that proved I'd healed. Sometimes, when I was alone in the evenings, I'd open the drawer that held everything. Claudia's apology, Helen's letter, Evan's first crayon drawing, a photo of Claire asleep in my arms. Pieces of a story that could have ended in bitterness but didn't. Each one reminded me that redemption doesn't arrive all at once. It drips in slowly, year by year, through small acts of decency that no one writes headlines about. That winter, I turned 70. Evan and Hannah surprised me with a dinner. Nothing extravagant, just family, a few friends, and too much food. When they brought out the cake, Claire insisted on helping me blow out the candles. "Make a wish, Grandpa," she shouted, her eyes wide with excitement. I closed my eyes. For the first time in decades, I realized I didn't have one. I already had everything I needed, so instead, I whispered a quiet thank you to the years that broke me and the years that built me back. When I opened my eyes, Claire was clapping her small hands, crumbs of frosting on her chin. Evan was smiling from across the table, his arm around Hannah. And just like that, I understood something simple. You don't measure life by how long it takes to find happiness. You measure it by the moments you finally stop searching. The next morning I woke early. Snow had fallen overnight, soft and deep. The world outside looked brand new again. Blank, unspoiled, waiting. I stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in the cold air. Across the yard, tiny footprints dotted the snow, Claire's left behind from the night before. They curved from the driveway to the porch steps, stopping right where I stood now. I smiled. Those prints would fade by noon, swallowed by the next layer of snowfall. But they had been there. Proof that she'd come, that she existed, that the world kept moving forward. And in that moment, I realized that maybe we're all just footprints in someone else's snow, here for a while. Fading eventually, but meaningful all the same. I raised my mug slightly toward the horizon, where the morning light was breaking. "For the long way around," I murmured again, "and for what it taught me." Then I turned back inside where the house was warm, and life, and finally it was quiet in the right ways. The following year, life settled into the kind of rhythm you don't notice until one quiet afternoon makes you stop and feel it. Days had become gentler, the kind of days where nothing big happens but everything feels earned. I spent my mornings tending the small garden behind the house. The tulips that Claire and I had planted the year before came back, stronger and taller than before. She loved watering them, often overwatering until puddles formed around the stems. "Grandpa, they're thirsty," she'd say, splashing her little watering can until her shoes were soaked. "They're satisfied," I'd laugh, taking the can gently from her hands. "Even flowers need a little restraint," she'd tilt her head, pretending to understand. But she was learning, not just about plants, but about patience. That's what I realized children really teach us, patience that doesn't hurt anymore. Evan and Hannah had moved closer by then, just across town, in a modest 2-bedroom with a big yard and a squeaky porch swing. Evan still worked construction during the week and helped me run the foundation on weekends. Hannah had taken a part-time job at the clinic and volunteered for our outreach programs. They didn't talk about money much, not in the way they used to. Now it was about schedules, Claire's preschool, and what to cook for dinner. Ordinary things. Beautifully ordinary things. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, Evan and I sat on his back porch watching the sunset drip gold over the rooftops. Claire was chasing bubbles across the yard, her laughter slicing clean through the air. "You know," Evan said, "sometimes I catch myself thinking about the past. Not in a guilty way, just as a reminder." "Of what?" I asked. "That no one's too far gone," he said. "Not me, not Mom, not anyone. It just takes losing everything to figure out what matters." I nodded. "Losing everything teaches you that you didn't really need much in the first place." He smiled faintly. "Guess you learned that earlier than I did." "Pain's a good teacher," I said. "But it's an expensive education." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, worth every penny, though." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only exists when there's nothing left to prove. That autumn, the foundation received a state grant, our first big recognition. It wasn't massive, but it allowed us to expand programs and hire a few full-time staff. Evan insisted that the new office include a small mural of tulips on one wall, Claire's contribution. During the ceremony, A reporter approached me for an interview. "Mr. Hale," she asked, holding out a recorder, "what inspired you to start this foundation?" I smiled, looking at the crowd, at Evan, at Hannah, at the volunteers and families we'd helped. "Failure," I said, "and the realization that the worst thing that ever happened to me ended up saving my life." She raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a statement." "It's the truth," I said. "Some people get lucky early. Some of us need to fall apart first." She nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes I hoped would make sense later. Afterward, Evan found me by the coffee table. "You're getting good at that," he said. "Public speaking. I still prefer talking to plants," I said. He laughed. "They're better listeners, too." By winter, Claire had started preschool. One afternoon, she came home with a drawing she'd made in class. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. "One tall, one medium, one small. That's me, Daddy, and Grandpa," she announced proudly. I looked at it for a long time before hanging it on my fridge. That night, when I turned off the kitchen light, the drawing caught a sliver of moonlight, just enough to make the crayon rainbow glow faintly. I stood there longer than I should have, realizing how far we'd all come. The boy who once refused my calls was now the man teaching his daughter what love looks like, and the man who once believed he'd lost his family forever, had found a new one in the ruins. By spring, my health had started to slow me down. Nothing serious, just the usual reminders. A little more stiffness in the mornings, a little less energy in the afternoons. Evan noticed before I mentioned it. "You're pushing too hard," he said one day after finding me still at my desk past midnight. "Just finishing reports," I said, waving him off. He shook his head. "Dad, the foundation doesn't need you at every meeting. You built it to survive you, remember?" I smiled faintly. "I suppose I did. Then let it." He was right, of course. I'd spent so many years building, fixing, cartooning, it was hard to accept that maybe it was okay to rest. So I did. I started walking more, reading again, spending quiet mornings watching the sunrise instead of checking spreadsheets. The world didn't fall apart. The foundation kept running. Evan had grown into the role without me even realizing it. He'd become the man I used to imagine when I first taught him how to hold a hammer. Not the boy chasing wealth, but the man building something real. One night that summer, we had another small family dinner. Claire insisted on setting the table herself. Forks all on one side, spoons in a pile, napkins folded like paper boats. When we sat down, she clasped her little hands together and said, "Can we say thank you?" "Of course," Hannah said softly. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Claire squeezed her eyes shut. "Thank you for Mommy, Daddy, Grandpa, and the flowers. And the cookies. And the moon," Evan grinned. "You forgot the broccoli." She peeked one eye open. "Not thankful for that." We laughed, and all 3 of us, and something about the sound made my chest ache in the best possible way. Later that night, when they left, Evan turned at the door. "You know," he said quietly, "she calls you her favorite person." I smiled. "She's got good taste." He hesitated, then said, "You're mine too." I didn't reply right away. My throat was too tight for words. So I just nodded, and he understood. That night, as I sat by the window with the moon high above the trees, I found myself thinking about time, how it doesn't heal by erasing, but by layering new things on top until the old wounds become part of the foundation. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to leave behind something sturdier than what we inherited. Outside, the tulips were swaying gently in the night breeze, the same ones Claire had watered too much, and in their quiet persistence I saw something familiar. Survival, forgiveness, growth, the long way around, still blooming. By the time the next winter rolled in, the air in Spokane had that clean, brittle stillness that only comes after snow. It muffled everything, car engines, footsteps, even time itself. From my window, I could see the world turning white again, the neighborhood roofs soft under the weight of December. I was 72. My days had become deliberate, peaceful things. I woke early, brewed coffee, fed the birds, and read until sunlight crept across the kitchen table. It was a quiet rhythm, but it fit me now, like a well-worn coat. The foundation ran without me. Evan had taken over fully, and he was good at it, better than I ever was. He'd turned it into something more modern, more connected, expanding programs, adding workshops, digital outreach. But he still came by every Sunday, rain or shine, just like he had since that first Christmas after everything fell apart. That December morning, the doorbell rang before I'd even finished my coffee. When I opened the door, the smell of cold air and cinnamon spilled inside. Hannah stood there holding a tray of cookies, Evan behind her carrying a small pine tree in a pot. Claire peeked out from under her father's coat, grinning like a spark. "Surprise," she yelled. "We brought Christmas early." I stepped aside, laughing. "You're a week early." "Exactly," Evan said. "We figured we'd get ahead of the weather." They set up the little tree in the corner of the living room. Not fancy, just simple and real. Hannah hung tiny white lights around it, while Claire placed a paper star on top. She turned to me, cheeks pink from the cold. "Grandpa, it's your tree now. Daddy says when you look at it, you have to make a wish." I smiled. "And what do I wish for?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Something you don't already have." I looked at her, at my son beside her, at the light dancing across the walls. "I'll have to think about that," I said softly. That night after they left, the little pine glowed quietly in the dark room. I sat beside it for a while, the fire popping in the hearth, the snow whispering against the windows. I thought about how much the world had changed, how much we had changed once. My life had been measured by what I'd lost: a marriage, a home, a son, 20 years. Now it was measured by what I'd gained: peace, purpose, forgiveness, a granddaughter who believed in wishes. I reached for my notebook, the same worn ledger I'd used for decades. Only this time there were no accounts, no calculations, just small notes I wanted to leave behind. If you ever lose everything, remember this. It means you're free to rebuild honestly. Forgiveness is not a gift you give others. It's a key you turn in your own lock. Love, when it returns, never looks like it did before. That's what makes it real. I wrote until the words came slower, then set the pen down and watched the lights blink on and off, like a heartbeat. A week later, we celebrated Christmas at Evan's house. The table was crowded with food and noise, laughter, clinking dishes, Claire's non-stop chatter. After dinner, Evan handed me a small wrapped box. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Open it." Inside was a framed photograph and a collage, really. 4 pictures side by side. The first was the old one. Me, decades ago, standing beside a young Evan, fishing pole in hand. The second was of us rebuilding the foundation office last year, both of us laughing mid-conversation. The third, Hannah holding baby Claire in the hospital, both of them asleep. And the last, taken that summer, all of us together in the garden, tulips blooming behind us. Underneath the pictures was a single line he'd written: "The long way around was worth it." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just looked at it, at proof that the world can bend, can break, and somehow still find its way back to grace. When I finally looked up, Evan's eyes were damp but steady. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." I shook my head. "No, son. Thank you for coming home." The next morning was quiet again. The house smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. I made coffee and walked to the window, watching the sunrise push its way through the snow clouds. The world glittered, gold over white. I thought about Claudia then, but not with bitterness. Just acceptance. She'd been a chapter, a painful, necessary one. Without her, without Evan's distance, without all that heartbreak, none of this peace would have existed. That's the thing about life. The very events that break you often end up shaping the person capable of healing. Sometime that week, Evan came by alone. He looked around the house, at the photos, the books, the little pine tree still standing in the corner. "Dad," he said after a while, "you ever think about selling this place? Moving somewhere warmer?" I smiled. "Maybe one day. But not yet. There's still something about the winters here that keeps me honest." He chuckled. "You've always been stubborn." "Resilient," I corrected again, and we both laughed. We talked for hours that afternoon, the kind of talk you only have when you both know time is finite, but not yet urgent. He told me about new projects, about how the foundation was expanding across state lines. I listened, proud in the quiet way fathers are proud, without needing to say it out loud. When he left, he hugged me tighter than usual. "See you Sunday, old man." "Bring the kid," I said. "And cookies." "You got it." That Sunday never came. It wasn't tragic, not really. Just time doing what time does. I went to bed that Friday night. Snow still falling outside, the pine tree light still blinking softly, and somewhere between one breath and the next, my heart decided it had done enough. They said I looked peaceful. I believe them. Evan told the story at my funeral. Not the sad version, but the true one. He talked about the Christmas dinner 20 years ago, about greed and silence and what forgiveness really costs. He said, "My father taught me that wealth means nothing if you can't sit across from someone you've hurt and still see love in their eyes." People cried. But they also laughed at my stubbornness, my terrible coffee, my obsession with tulips. Claire placed a single flower on the casket. "For Grandpa," she whispered, because he grew everything again, and that was enough. Years later, long after the foundation had grown into something bigger than either of us imagined, Evan hung my framed notebook page in the office lobby. It read, "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just stops it from ruining your future." People still pause to read it on their way out. Every spring, Claire, now taller, stronger, louder, plants tulips in front of the building. Red, yellow, and white. She says they're for everyone who's starting over. And in some quiet way, I suppose I am there too. In the blooms, in the laughter, in the long way around that finally found its ending. The snow will fall again. The flowers will rise again. And somewhere in between, a man will look back on his life and realize that every loss, every silence, every broken thing was just the road leading him home.